Your Honour, last week we had the privilege of hearing from Dei Mareta Kopu and Lady Tūreiti Moxon. I say that because I need to acknowledge ngā putsi o Ngāti Mihiro, Ngāti Ngare, Kahununu Whānui. These ladies are here because Miss Jean Te Huia, for better or worse, she had the good fortune of marrying a person whose name is Jean Te Huia. And his first cousin is the lady sitting next to Joe, who happens to be my grandmother as well. Next to her is my grandmother's sister, who was another first cousin to Uncle Joe. Next to her is Uncle Joe's sister, and next to her is his daughter. And on this side is the head of our settlement trust, Liz Munro. They are all here supporting Auntie Jean. So I need to acknowledge them being here. So, e te pai, tēnā koutou. Ms. Jean Te Huia filed the application for urgency for good cause. Prior to the Uplift video, mainstream New Zealand knew nothing of the plight of vulnerable mothers, in particular Māori mothers and their whānau. We were oblivious to the fear that they lived in, oblivious to the cruel and shocking uplift strategies used, oblivious to the medieval policies and practices that our Māori people lived under, but now we know. The use of the words oblivious, fear, cruel, shocking, medieval are in this instance justified. Council was there the day Oranga Tamariki tried to take this newborn child and saw for himself things that were not shown on the Uplift video. Had New Zealand seen what occurred in that family group conference later that day, New Zealand would have demanded that Oranga Tamariki be shut down the very next day. People lay at the heart of the Y2823 claim. It would be easy to forget that given the statistics provided by statistician Len Cook and given the hundreds of documents that we have filed on this record. But at the end of the day, this claim is about people. In Council's submission, this inquiry is about how Māori people have for generations been victims of racism, both entrenched and systemic, and how that racism affects in the most horrible way already vulnerable Māori. It's about how that racism has been permitted to exist because of a fundamental power imbalance that allows racism to be heaped upon Māori and their most basic fundamental human right, that to look after their children. But at its most basic, it's about people. From this starting point, the other issues encompassing this inquiry include, and I've got example after example, I'll have them taken as read, Your Honour. If we accept that part of this inquiry is concerned with racism, then what evidence do we have to exhibit that racism? The starting point is that racism does exist in New Zealand, and in Council's submission has been in existence from the very beginning. Every example that Jean Te Huia gives in her evidence illustrates an example of racism. In Council's respectful submission, the Waitangi Tribunal owes its very existence to racism, because fundamentally every claim to the tribunal contains at some level or another an element of racism. Racism exists in every facet of New Zealand society, and it's the reason why we are now having our generic kaupapa inquiry into how our soldiers were treated when they came back, local government, health, education, the environment, mana tāne and mana wahine issues. We know that Māori traditionally received manual type work and today are more likely to be paid less than non-Māori. From there, Māori are more likely to live in colder, damper, more overcrowded houses than non-Māori. Māori are more likely to be on a benefit than non-Māori. We know too that our Māori children will not succeed academically at the same rate of other children who live in higher decile school areas. We know that Māori are underrepresented in both local and central government, and overrepresented when it comes to receiving a custodial sentence than non-Māori, including being placed in Oranga Tamariki. And I need not mention the plethora of health issues that plague our Māori people, in particular our mental health. These examples of racism, which are either currently before the tribunal as part of the current kaupapa inquiry, or will be in the future, are all contributing factors that Oranga Tamariki take into account when deciding or not to uplift the Māori child from its whānau. For example, Oranga Tamariki do take into account the house that the whānau live in, both its condition and the number of people living in it, the employment status of the whānau involved, the mental health of the parents, whether the parents have been in state care themselves, whether the parents have been in prison before, and whether the parents are gang affiliated. There is an inherent hypocrisy where a system that is fundamentally racist punishes Māori in one of the cruelest ways imaginable when they fail to overcome the very hurdles that the Crown put in front of them in the first place. In essence, Māori are judged for all the inequities and inequalities that they suffer, despite the Crown putting them in that very position. The evidence of Len Cook is crucial here. Mr. Cook's evidence spoke to research illustrating decades of inequality and inequity. These were cold, hard, indisputable facts, illustrating the imbalance and prejudice suffered by Māori over decades. But Māori didn't need the professional research undertaken by Mr. Cook to substantiate their claims of racism. They've been living it for generations. The actions of Ms. Jean Te Huia during the attempted uplift in Hastings were crucial in more ways than one could know. By doing what she did, she not only stopped the forced removal of that child, but she stopped the severing of the connection from the child and its mother, its father, and its whānau. She stopped the severing of whakapapa. She stopped potential physical and mental abuse. She stopped the possibility of anxiety, stress, depression, and poor mental health for the child, the parents, the grandparents, and the wider whānau, and much more. Mr. Huia has a wealth of experience and knowledge across the health, education, and social services sector. She is the CEO of Ngā Maia Māori Midwives Trust and brings the collective voices and concerns from 300 Māori midwives from across Aotearoa. She doesn't pretend to be an expert in all the areas that have a part to play in her claim, namely housing issues, mental health issues, imprisonment, substance abuse, gang activity, and so on. But she speaks with authority on the various and numerous real-life examples of uplifts that she has personally seen in her practice as a midwife of 29 years. And the examples she has seen are horrific. They speak to a culture and practice the substance of which would horrify the general public if they knew about them. And the reality is, due to the uplift video, the general public now know what Oranga Tamariki do and how they do it, and they are horrified, shocked, and outraged. The reason why the uplift video went viral and why the public felt the way they did is because at some basic human level, people and society were shocked at what they were witnessing. They knew there was something fundamentally wrong with what they were watching, and instinctively they knew that it wasn't right. Mr. Huia has filed 3 briefs of evidence as part of these proceedings and has given considerable time to following and reviewing the various reports that have been written about the policies and practices of Oranga Tamariki. A careful analysis of some of the issues associated with the findings have been set out in Mr. Huia's evidence. Mr. Huia speaks of her personal experiences and involvement, often as the token Māori, on advisory boards, and acknowledges the valuable and important work done by Whānau Ora, the Children's Commissioner, the Ombudsman, and Len Cook. Mr. Huia discusses the issues with the way Te Tiriti is applied and practiced by government and entities, and requests major changes to legislation to properly incorporate Te Tiriti principles and obligations. She requests Te Tiriti be drafted as a constitution of Aotearoa. In response to the Crown redressing the harm and prejudice caused to Tamariki Māori, Mr. Huia suggests that the system that uplifts children needs to be changed and that proper recognition must be given to identifying and finding those children who have been lost in the system. Furthermore, ongoing support and compensation should be provided for those whānau who have been affected. Mr. Huia notes that Oranga Tamariki have failed 14 independent reviews since 1989, and while this is the case, it is still the Pākehā worldview that is the dominant one. Māori participation in society, workforces such as midwifery, and decision-making continues to be limited because of colonisation and ongoing institutional racism. I'm going to jump forward, Your Honour. By filing her claim and stopping that one uplift, Jean Te Huia set in motion the potential for dramatic change, and change is a large part of what is needed in terms of recommendations sought from this tribunal. Everything must change. It cannot be permitted to continue. Too much and too many lives are at stake, and the government must not continue to turn a blind eye to what is happening to Māori and their children. While the tribunal are nearing the end of its historical treaty grievances, Māori are fully cognizant that the land that they have lost to the Crown is now, for the most part, beyond return. But 5 years into the tribunal's generic kaupapa inquiry program, Māori are fully aware that their future and that of their children is very much in their own hands, and is a kaupapa still worth fighting for. Our land is all but gone, and we can't get it back. But our future, our people, our children, they still belong to us. We can still fight for them, and that's what this inquiry is all about.